All right. So it's interesting. Most people think of the NFL and sports as you're just athletes, but the reality is that there's a lot more to it. Some organized, some individual. Let's start with the organized side of things. You're a member of both the executive board and the athlete advisory board for One Team Collective. It started last December. Not too many people know what it is. Let's start there. What's One Team Collective?
Yeah, so the One Team Collective is the NFL, PAs, the Players Union for the NFL, athlete-driven accelerator. If you think about all the different ways you can engage with athletes, historically has been only large companies engaging in some way where only the few at the top, maybe the Drew Breeses or the Peyton Mannings get there's some type of licensing deal or there's some broad licensing deal as well. There's a way, and the One Team Collective is a way to engage with companies that are young and growing, sometimes in the form of equity, but a group of different types of venture capitalists, investors, research organizations coming together to help drive and identify some of the young companies that can work with not only the NFLPA, but the players themselves as well. So huge value add, and it really was, it's a truly innovative business model in and of itself where you really kind of were passing up opportunity. If you're the NFLPA or if you're any union, you're passing up opportunity to not have a vehicle to be able to engage with a young, growing, bright company that the athletes up here, as well as across the NFLPA, could add a ton of value.
So there's a lot of value that's there. There's individual investments. You're looking at across the spectrum of tech that can help the teams, the players. But it's not just that. There's a transition that has to take place, too. So, Marques, there was an announcement a day or two ago. You're getting into a juice company franchise, right?
Right, yep.
So how's that transition look like for you? You start as a player. You work your way up. What tech are you thinking of? And is it always, hey, I need to focus on something after? Or is it smarter for athletes, do you think, to stay in the bread and butter of sports-related tech?
Well, it's an interesting balance that you have to strike because, in order to get into and stay in the elite level of sports, there's a certain focus that needs to be present for you to actually get a job and keep a job. And at the same time, you're always cognizant of, the end is always nearer than you think. So there's really a delicate balance of how do you look at and really leverage what you're doing, the platform of pro sports, and how do you start to create opportunities, post-career while you're still at the height of your career. And it's tough because, you have to give two things, 110% of your time and energy, and that's just really a tough thing to do. So, just really being able to, for me, and I think for a lot of other guys, being able to look at off-the-field opportunities and post-career opportunities in an industry that you're familiar with and that you can walk in the door an expert with, I think it tends to bode well for you.
All right, so let's talk about that. You've got the One Team Collective site. Go there. It's pretty informative. And it lists that the entity is looking at fan engagement, data analytics, performance and training, mobile fitness, sports nutrition, consumer products, fantasy sports, gaming, wearable tech, new media, VR, and AR. That's a lot, right?
I think they just try to list as many buzzwords as they possibly can.
I know. All we need is
AI, blockchain.
Blockchain, AI, exactly. Now, if you're looking at that much, the reality is it has to go back to something. What do you think the most prominent tech in the NFL is right now? What's really going to be a game changer, Coby?
I can tell you what the first answer is. It's going to be wearables. The real answer, though, is that wearables don't provide any actionable data at this point, or enough to garner the attention that they've received. Sorry for the guy who said woo. That said, though, I think that there is enough momentum behind it that there will come a time when the actionable data will be useful to professional athletes.
All right, so let's stay on wearables then. It's the rise of the quantified athlete. You get your biometrics, your pulse, your CO2, everything else. If wearables aren't giving the data that is as effective as it could be, where does it need to go?
I mean, I think it goes back to what I just said, like actionable data where it can change how you are training. It can change the things that you are doing when you are training based on that information, going beyond the step counting and the things that ultimately just end up in the narcissistic world of social media. And so it's having that information and being able to do something with it that ultimately is that step up to usability.
Yeah, I'd like to add that as well. I think it's going to come in a couple of different forms. And part of that is there just needs to be new innovation in the hardware side. Wrist-worn metrics and the inability to use that as a data point to then tell a story about the entire body is very difficult. And, in a lot of ways, so that's kind of, there needs to be hardware innovation, so the ability to capture highly accurate data anywhere on body. The next piece is, kind of the core of the quality of the data itself. And, the dirty little secret is the quality of the data from the wrist it's just shitty. It sucks. And the inability to democratize what you have in a lab setting with highly accurate capture and then put that into the market, you're comparing apples to oranges, so it's not really relevant. When you have this innovation in the hardware and then that innovation kind of really leads to very, very high quality data, raw data, and then you can layer algorithms on top of that. You start to get more and more insight, and then you start to have this kind of jump over the chasm from kind of this broader, from the elite athlete story to this broader human performance story.
So if we're looking at the broader human performance story, there's a lot of tech that can go into it, whether it be AI and blockchain, like you mentioned. What type of companies, and this is from the crowd using the Slido app, what are the current companies you're working with, and what are the type of companies that you're looking to invest in? And this is across the board.
I think for me, within the sports landscape, the thing that's really the most interesting to me is just media and interactive media. And I think there's a lot that goes into that. But as we are living kind of in this social media era, I think there are really some opportunities to take content and really spin it in a different way, and really spin the perspective that the content is coming from, and being able to work through one team. Being able to put the power back into the content creators' hands through a lot of these different technologies, the AR, the VR, is something that, just as an industry focus, is something I'm really excited about.
So 2 years ago, Discovery actually found a company at Collision that we ended up investing in called Cinebody, and they're working with a few of the sports teams. It's user-generated content. If we're staying on that trend, what type of UGC is that important? Is the fan viewing experience going to be disrupted as well? What do you think is more important right now, to focus on the individual sports teams, the league, the actual performance side, or is it the viewer side for the fans?
Yeah, that's a really broad question, which is great. I love how you asked it. I think absolutely focusing on the experience, the fan engagement, or you can define it as fan experience, fan engagement, offering different ways to consume the game as well as just consume unique content overall. That's really what Marques was alluding to as well, or kind of piling onto that as well. So focusing on new ways to deliver that, and technology is enabling a ton of that. Sports being a great test bed for a lot of that as well, right? And the kind of very, very valuable live sports programs where that's really not going to be phased out. A lot of things can be time shifted, but time shifting a live event, a live sporting event, is captured eyeballs is kind of very important. So the ability to have that interactive in a variety of different ways, as well as kind of even post processing, real kind of amazing content, really helps the experience itself, and personalizing that makes it even better. And that kind of gets down the path where I'm sure you guys are going at Discovery, as well as a ton of people are going on personalizing each of that content during a live stream, as well as kind of post process.
What's that process? Walk me through it. So are players looking for tech that they bring to the teams? Are the teams finding the tech that they bring to the players? Is it different from when you leave the league and try and get back in and remain involved? How does that work?
So I would say that from a founder's perspective, I'm imagining a lot of people in here looking to start or have started their own company. And I think the initial reaction is, wow, if I could just get the NFL to sign on as a customer, I'll have money rolling in, and then I can kind of work down the pyramid. And what I've found is, in working with some of these companies and bringing them to the team, is that the NFL realizes the value of their brand, probably overvalues their own brand to the point where they say, why are we going to pay you? We're the NFL. You should be paying us to say that you're affiliated with us. And so it becomes a challenge for these small companies to come into the meeting and say, hey, we'd really like to set up a deal with you guys, and it only costs this much. And the team slides the contract right back and said, that's nice, but it'll actually cost you this much. And so it's a challenging prospect to say, okay, we're just going to work down the pyramid. That said, there have been a few companies that have successfully kind of penetrated that market, but I think if you looked at the exits out of the sports space, you'd be challenged to find a successful financial outcome as opposed to other areas.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with that more. I mean, just having made close to 30 angel investments myself from my time as a player to where I'm at now, and then now having a launch of a fund that is focused on sports technology defined broadly is really important, because when I see businesses that are only focused on sports and the applications maybe with kind of, say the NFL or the NBA or whatever, just elite sports, that market's just not big enough to really warrant some type of exit that is going to warrant an investment as well. So the ability for kind of have that lens of sports be a great test bed in a variety of different ways, and you can walk through a ton of examples around that, but it has to be able to resonate and affect adjacent markets where you can scale into, right? Test bed, with the technology in sports as a petri dish, and then blow that out into a ton of different adjacent markets. And that's a core of how I look at the world, and quite honestly, I'm very passionate about really seeing that play out as technology is going to play a key role in making that happen.
Well, let me push back on that a little bit. Normally, you have VCs that need their specific return, 10x, 100x, whatnot, as they make their decisions. But when you talk about sports, so many of the players in the leagues oftentimes don't come from a privileged background. They resonate with many different ethnicities and cultural entities and sociostratic levels throughout the world and the country. Is there any interest, and this is partly coming from Slido as well, about investing and working with minority-run companies, social enterprise, impact investing? Is there an obligation, or should we be looking at that more from the sports side of things?
I think it'd be one thing if we were up here as a venture capitalist and we saw deal flow on a daily basis that was 10 decks long. It's another thing to be a professional athlete as a job and then do this kind of as a side. And I know you do it a lot more than I do, but I think it's challenging to kind of say, okay, here are the two deals I've seen in the last 2 months. How can I differentiate between and try to specialize in or help kind of these movements? And that said, I think it is something that is very important, but it is a challenge.
Yeah, and I think to piggyback on Coby's point, the deal flow that you have access to is the deal flow that you have access to. Mm-hmm. And, I think just it's human nature to invest in people and interact with people that you share, common core beliefs and core values with. And, I think from my standpoint, it's always something that's on my radar. Mm-hmm. And when the opportunity presents itself, it's something that I really, really do take a hard look at. Mm-hmm. And at the end of the day, I mean, technology is an industry and as a whole that, the best product is the best product, mm-hmm. right? So there's kind of that delicate balance with, product versus, product creator.
Yeah, I just want to add to that too, because it's something I'm very passionate about. As someone, I grew up in poverty, and I think about it all the time. And one of the great things about this country is a lot of it's not always, but it should be meritocracy based. Mm-hmm. And the ability for me, I'm always constantly looking, regardless of where you came from, wherever, whatever you look like, it doesn't matter. An unbelievably talented entrepreneur with the will to win, the will to survive, is one step away. And they just got to keep pounding and keep pounding and pounding and be found by the right people, the right resources to be able to make it happen. And obviously aligning some of the parts of the question around social impact and everything else, I think that just comes with being passionate and being really, really talented and wanting to see a company win. And I think that kind of naturally comes out, just depending on what area you want to focus on.
That makes sense. Now, we have time for probably 2 or 3 more questions. One from the crowd is, what kind of tech are you and your teammates talking about when you get together? And then that'll lead into, are you trying to take that to the next level for investments? Are you seeking them out?
Oh boy, I'm embarrassed to answer this question because, so I sit in the locker room sometimes and just kind of listen to the chatter in different corners, and knowing the kind of fair or unfair perception of athletes blowing their money, and then listening to kind of the run-up of cryptocurrency. If you went through the locker room and asked every guy kind of what technology was on the tip of their tongue this past season, it would have been cryptocurrency, and I think a fair amount of guys are probably paying for that decision at this point, and rightfully so.
What tech?
I haven't been in a locker room in about 3 years, so.
How about when you're hanging out with your
Teammates,
friends?
broadly speaking.
Yeah, right. So technology kind of moves in dog years. But I think performance and really the data around performance is probably a conversation that's really relevant right now. As the technology continues to advance and as we're seeking more and more data on players, the ownership of that data ultimately comes into question. When you're tracking movement and your GPS tracking movement and you're tracking load and all those things, you're not really crossing that ethical line quite yet. But when you start to get into biometric readings and heart rate monitors and really the commercialization of that data, you start to run into ethical challenges with that data and who owns it. So I would think that's probably a conversation that's if it's not here now, it's probably on the horizon.
Yeah, I would agree with that. It's just sitting on different player health and safety committees and a variety of different things. I think that Marques touched on something that is first and foremost. I used to think of my body as a business when I played in the NFL. Played 8 years, had a ton of surgeries, and always wanted to try to quantify different aspects and take guesswork on how I could feel good. And I think is each player and technology is going to enable that, right? Not just for elite athletes, but everyone else. But players more and more taking an approach to wanting to cover all the bases to feel good. And it's almost crazy if you have access to technology around, instead of saying, hey, wear this technology from the league or from the team, wear this because we want to monetize this in some way, instead of saying, hey, I actually can use a variety of tools, not only tied to wearables, by the way. There's kind of a massive amount of data sets that are all going to flow together from genetics, genomics, nutrition, sports medicine, quantifying rehabilitation. There's a whole area here that you can say, hey, how can I optimize my career? How can I optimize my earnings? And how can I play as long as I can? And technology can play a major, major role in that. At the same time, where can you actually create a bigger pie to monetize for not just the league side to own, but the players to own part of that pie as well, where we're all actually doing better, playing longer, playing better, performing better.
All right. And with that, it looks like we're out of time. Coby, Isaiah, Marques, thank you very much.